Okay, video number 5. Let's get this out of the way. What we're going to look at now, in the previous video we looked at the trade scenario. That's where you had to sell your shares in at least one company at least once during the 5 weeks. So we looked at how to do that, did some math. We're just going to finish that math off today, and then we'll go on to look at how to actually graph the progress of your portfolio against the All Ordinaries Index, which is part of the assignment task. Okay, so first thing here, I'm not going to, it's here if you want to pause it and peruse my mathematical proof. But basically, you might remember that we had a little magic shortcut for buying shares. So when you were buying shares, you could take your consideration, which was the raw cost of the shares without brokerage and GST, and multiply that by 1.022. That was the magic number. And doing that would add on brokerage and GST to give you the actual real cost. Well, what we've got here is something similar for selling shares. Because remember, when you sell shares, you don't get all of that consideration in your pocket. Brokerage and GST gets taken off, and you actually end up with less than what you sold it for originally. So here, our magic number is 0.978. If you multiply your consideration by 0.978, you will take off the brokerage and GST and give you what's called the net proceeds. Okay, to the business at hand. So I've looked at two things here. First thing I looked at is the hold scenario, which is where you kept the shares for, where you kept the shares for 5 weeks and then just sold them. Didn't do anything with them. So what I've done here, first thing, you might remember I had shares in Telstra, JB Hi-Fi, NAB and Rio Tinto. And I've just worked out the cost of buying each of those bundles of shares. So for instance, Telstra, 795 shares, I worked it out in an earlier video, that's how much I could buy, times by an original price of $4.92, and then multiplied by 1.022 to factor in brokerage and GST. So do that, add all those four figures together, gives me a total cost of $19,937. So I didn't spend all of my $20,000, I couldn't do that because there was a little bit of rounding off going on there. So that means I've got $62.78 in surplus funds, basically loose cash, kicking around. And I'll have to remember that when I get to the end. So I held those for 5 weeks, and I sold them. So over here I've worked out the proceeds from selling each of the bundles of shares. So for instance, Telstra, 795 shares, a closing price of, at the end of the 5 weeks, of $4.90. Multiply those two together and then multiply by 0.978 to factor in the brokerage and the GST. When I do that, I get these four figures here. To that, I have to then add on a 14-cent dividend on Telstra shares. So I might just show you where I got that from. If I'd been more organized, I would have had it pulled up already. Okay, so I basically just did it like this. I went to the Yahoo Finance page for Telstra. I looked at historical prices like we did earlier. And if you scroll down there you go. On the 19th of August, there was a 14-cent dividend paid on Telstra shares. Yeehaw. So that means I got 14 cents for every share I owned. So I've multiplied 795 by 14 cents there and got a total dividend of $111.30. So add that on to those four figures there. Also add on the $62.78 in surplus funds you had kicking around. And that gives you a total proceeds of $19,775.84. So in other words, I haven't quite got my $20,000 back. In fact, I've made a loss of $224.16. Okay, so that's the hold scenario. That's pretty easy. Next one's the trade scenario. That's where I sold, as you saw in the last video, or the third one perhaps. I sold my Rio Tinto shares, and I used the money I made from selling them to buy shares in Qantas. And that was on the 23rd of August, and I kept those shares in Qantas along with my other 3 bundles of shares for a further week, and then sold them all on the 30th of August. Okay, so to start off with, the total cost of buying the original portfolio shares, that's NAB, Rio Tinto, JB Hi-Fi and Telstra, that'll be the same, so I'm not going to repeat that calculation. I'll still have $62.78 in surplus funds. The first new thing I have to work out is the proceeds of selling my Rio Tinto shares on the 23rd of August. So I had 102 shares in that company, they were selling for $59.93 on that day. Multiply that by 0.978 to factor in brokerage and GST, and that gives me proceeds of $5,978. Now, you might have seen in the previous video, I worked out from that amount of money I could buy 4,482 shares in Qantas. What I've done here is I've worked out the cost of buying those shares, 4,482 multiplied by a market price on that day of $1.3050, then multiply that by the magic number to factor in brokerage and GST. It's going to cost me that much, $5,977. So they're not quite the same figures. So in fact, I'm going to have, bling bling, 69 cents left over after I've purchased those Telstra shares. So that's additional surplus funds that I have to keep track of. So anyway, bought the Qantas shares, kept all those shares for another week till the 30th of August, and then I sold them. So what I've done here is worked out the proceeds of selling those shares on the 30th of August. Haven't got full calculations for Telstra, JB Hi-Fi and NAB because they haven't changed. They're going to be no different from the hold scenario. For the Qantas bit, I have put in my full details here. So we've got those four figures. To that, I still have the $111.30 Telstra dividend, and I have $62.78 in surplus funds, plus that extra 69 cents I had left over when I bought the Qantas shares. Add all those figures together, gives me a total proceeds of $19,966. So I've still made a loss, but this time it's only been a loss of about $34, so I'm slightly better off. You will probably find, most of you, that you either just break even or you make a loss. Reason for that being is the Australian market has been what we'd call static, more or less, over the last 5 weeks, which means it hasn't really gone up, hasn't really gone down, kind of just stayed the same. And if it kind of just stays the same, unfortunately, because you have to pay brokerage and GST fees, you're actually going to make a loss. So that's just going to be it for most of you people, I think. So that's that math part done. We might now have a look at how to go about graphing, because one of the things the task wanted you to do was to graph the progress of your share portfolio, or compare your share portfolio's progress to that of the ordinaries index. So the best way of doing that is to draw a graph. But first, you need the ordinaries index data to work with. So it's just treat it like a regular company, even though it's not a company. Go to the home page. Up the top there, it's got all ords. That's short for the ordinaries index. So click on that. Go to historical prices, like you did with a regular company. Put in the correct dates. So it's going to be July the 26th, 2013. To August the 30th. Click Get Prices. Okay, and what we want to do here is do that little download to spreadsheet thing down the bottom, and that'll give me one of those CSV files. Okay, in the CSV file, the only thing I want is the closing price. I'll delete everything else. Might even get rid of the word close there. Maybe grab that column and move it somewhere else. Now, at the moment, it's not quite doing what we want because I might just stick AOI on top as well. You remember our share market indices that we had in both cases, the trade one and the hold one, started at 100. So on the 26th of July, you started at 100, and then your index either went up or down from there. You can see this guy here, this column of data, that last figure down the bottom would be July the 26th. That's not 100, is it? So that's not quite what we want. So we're going to have to stick a little formula next to it. And that formula is going to go a little bit something like this. Equals, bracket, click on that cell, and then divide by the original price. So in this case, that'll be the bottom number, which is E30 for me. Now that's going to have to be one of those absolute references, so I need to put the dollar sign in front of the letter E and the dollar sign in front of the 30. Close the bracket off, and then multiply by 100. And that gives me a starting index of 100. I might just write that down. Don't know how clearly you can see that on here. I basically did this. Just give me a sec. So for me, whoops. For me, E30 was the cell I clicked into. It'll be different for you depending on where you put your data. But that there is the formula that I typed into Excel. So that's what you want to put in there as well. Okay, going back to it. And then click and drag to fill that all the way to the top. And then maybe, because it's got heaps of decimals, just format the cells to 2 decimal places. Now I've done that, actually I should just get rid of that original column. Kill that. Whoops, maybe not. Okay, I'll leave it there for the time being. And I'll just put AOI on the top here to remind me that that's the AOI as well. Okay, so I've got that. Next to that, I want to put the indices for the other two things. So I want the indices for the hold scenario and the indices for the trade one. So this is my index for the hold scenario. I'm going to highlight that bad boy. Right click and go copy. Go back to this spreadsheet and paste it next door. Okay, if it ever does that, you may have to do this. If you go under paste options, it gives you, I don't know how clearly you can see this, it gives you about 6 different options. Choose paste values. There we go. Sometimes the computer will crap itself if you try and copy something directly across like that. So you have to paste it as a table of values rather than formulas. Now that's the hold scenario, so I'm going to put hold on top. And then the next one is the trade scenario. So I'm going to go to my other spreadsheet, pull that up, copy that one's index. And then paste. I forgot to paste as values, didn't I? Bad. There we go. So we're nearly there. So now I want to draw a graph that has these 3 index things on it and to show how they've changed over time. So I highlight them all, go to insert, go to a line graph like that, and there we go. That's worked pretty well. It's even shown me which one is which. So blue is the all ordinaries index, red is the hold scenario, and that's the trade scenario. There's just one little problem here. And that's if you look at it, they all end up at the same value of 100. And you think to yourself, oh, hang on, didn't I start at 100? And then you have this horrible, sickening realization that because your numbers start at the most recent date and finish, like the top number's the most recent value and the bottom number's the oldest one, your numbers are back to front. Then you go, oh my God, what am I going to do about that? Turns out it's actually not easy to flip the order of a set of numbers like that. There's a bit of a trick to it. So we want to take the bottom number and put it up the top and take the top number and put it down the bottom. And that way when we draw a graph it'll be the right way around, because at the moment it's back to front. This is where you started at and this is where you ended at, whereas really we want to start at this end and end at this end. So I'm just going to delete that for now. I'm going to show you a trick. Okay, so to actually flip these numbers upside down, to put the 102 down the bottom and the 100 up the top, you have to do a little dummy column next to it. We won't go into the reasons why, just trust me, this trick works. So I'm going to put the numbers 1, 2, 3 like that there, fill it down so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, da 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 da. And then I'm going to highlight these numbers. I'm go up to the data tab. And you've got here sorting options. So you want the one that says, the one I've got highlighted at the moment, sort largest to smallest, because that's going to flip that column of numbers upside down. So I'm going to click on that. Comes up this little warning here, Excel found data next to your selection, blah blah blah. Do you want to? What do you want to do? You want to expand the selection. Don't ask me why, because I don't want to explain. But choose expand the selection. Go sort, and I was about to say power, but something's gone horribly wrong here. What has gone horribly wrong? Hang on. Might just Control Z that for a second. Okay, I'm going to try that one more time. Okay. You might be able to see my issue here. The issue I have is that they're all flipped the right way around except for the AOI one. Why is that doing that? Oh, that is frustrating. Hang on, just bear with me here, people.